I'd like to introduce you to our speakers, or introduce them to you, I should say. That's more appropriate. Martha Kruy has served as an instructional and reference librarian since 2005. She's currently a reference, instruction, and assessment librarian at Central Connecticut State University, which you may have heard of. It's a prestigious university. She is focused on researching academic information literacy program assessment methods. She completed her MFA degree in December 2014, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You're still recovering, I'm sure.
Yes.
Elizabeth Brewer is not a librarian. So don't show her the secret handshake or anything. She's an assistant professor of English and the director of composition at Central Connecticut State University, imaginatively enough. Her research interests include rhetoric and disability studies, faculty development, and writing program administration. She has published in Composition Studies, Disability Studies Quarterly, and Kairos. Carl Antonucci, who no one in the library world has heard of, is Director of Library Services right here in this very campus. He's been employed in library services and higher education since 1993. He has recently completed a PhD in American History at Providence College and has a master's in library science from Simmons College. So please welcome our speakers.
I'm going to start off. And by the way, we are going to be showing LibGuides that I created, and the LibGuide that will have all the handouts that we have shown in this will be on these cards that you can pick up and use at the end of the session.
Try to save some papers.
Yes, we're trying to be green.
Green cards.
They are green.
That was Christine Edwards. I don't think she's here. So this past year, I spent a good amount of time in both Dr. Antonucci's and Elizabeth Brewer's classes in separate ways, in different ways. I was embedded in both of their classes. They both had created their own assignments and their own curriculum. I came in and helped introduce the students to the information literacy component. So we decided to do a review first for this particular presentation, and we reviewed what the embedded librarian is about. There's quite a bit of literature out there, and one of the handouts that's actually in the LibGuide for this presentation is a bibliography on what embedded librarianship is about. And currently there is, of course, a very large disparity in how embedded librarianship is defined. So many people, probably for every individual librarian out there, there is a different definition of what an embedded librarian is about. Some of the more common definitions are that we have librarians who are embedded in a course management system such as Blackboard Learn or Moodle. One is a collaboration on course design and assignments, so the librarian is actually working with the professor or faculty member to design the entire information literacy component of that class. Another one is where the librarian is co-teaching in the course, in person or online, and that was one of my assignments with Dr. Antonucci. I was helping to co-teach a few of the classes. And then there's an in-depth research to support student research. That's more of the traditional embedded librarian. That comes from more where the library liaisons might have been working one-on-one with the students from a specific department. There's also the in-depth research to support clientele work, where we're not only working with the students, but we're also working with the faculty to provide them with their research needs as well. And then there's the physical co-location with the academic clientele, so the librarian is actually sitting within the department. They actually have an office within the department that they have been assigned to or that they are embedded in. And of course the last model is the embedded via social media, which is a brand new model. So these primary models originally, historically, like I said, they were the librarian was embedded through a library liaison program. However, more recently, the expression embedded librarian has been taken from the embedded journalist model, where the embedded journalists are actually in the field, in war, on the front lines with the military, and are eating and drinking and sleeping the entire experience with the soldiers. So that is where we are now taking, or where embedded librarianship is now progressing towards this concept of the librarian being part of the department in some way or another. So many of the reports are having the actual academic colleges or departments have an office for the librarian in their suites. The information literacy outcomes, which are of course very important, especially when you need to assess how the embedded librarian is working within the department courses, includes the topic and thesis development, which I worked on to a great extent with Dr. Brewer's class, as well as demonstrating access to scholarly and reputable resources, which I worked on with both classes, with both Dr. Antonucci's and Dr. Brewer's class. To review the book through critical analysis, this was Dr. Antonucci's. He assigned a critical book review. So I was there to help not only determine what their topic was going to be, or what their topic biography was going to be, but how to find the other supplementary materials that would work with those biographies. To identify bias in treatment of the biographical subject, again, Dr. Antonucci's class, and I did have students coming to me and asking me, what does this mean? What is bias? What are you talking about? So that's where I would sit down with the students and explain, okay, who have you read in addition to this biography? They had to read more about the person that they were reading about so that they could determine whether or not there was going to be a bias in the biography that they had read. And then properly and appropriately cite in Chicago Notes and Bibliography style all their supporting evidence. Now this was a really big deal. The first semester that I did it, I only drew a diagram, which you will see in a few minutes, of how to cite a book in Chicago Notes and Bibliography. For the second semester, I built upon that, and I did more of the articles, the database, the websites, those kinds of other resources that the students might be using as in addition to just the biographies that they were reading. The supporting staff and faculty, let me know, Carl, because I can't remember where we switch off. The supporting staff, I was working with the rest of the library department. So I was working with the head of reference, and I was working with the other librarians who were sitting at the reference desk, because of course the students would come to the reference desk and need help, and I wouldn't be always available. So when I would go to the classes, I would say, I am here, and you can always ask me for questions for help, but you can also go to the reference desk and ask them anytime you need to. And they were very helpful. We worked in concert to help the students find biographies, which was one of the most difficult tasks for these students, because they needed to not only find a biography, but they needed to find a biography on a historic person from 1877 in the United States to the present. And that person had to have enough history for there to be a biography on that person, but at the same time, it couldn't be, it had to be more scholarly as well. So there were a lot of elements that the students had to take into consideration. The faculty members in the history department have now seen the LibGuide that I created with Dr. Antonucci, and are now requesting access to that subject guide. And we're hoping possibly in the future to be working with the history department as well and embedding librarians there. And I will add that we now have, I think, 5 classes of the composition classes who want embedded librarians for next semester, after this semester with Dr. Brewer. So the librarian's role in English 110, I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit. I taught full or partial class sessions in the library classroom. So Dr. Brewer brought her class to the library for four different classes. This past semester, as you all probably had to deal with, we had a lot of Monday snow days. So, and her classes were on Mondays and Wednesdays. So we had to kind of stretch it out into, what, April, I think?
Yeah, I think we were originally going to have 5 classes too, but that wasn't possible. So,
yeah. So it was a little bit, we had to be flexible, but it worked out well. So topic selection, I would just want to go and show you the LibGuide. So this is the LibGuide for this presentation. I don't want you, thank you very much. This is the LibGuide for this presentation that is on that green card, and we'll all be able to access this. The English 110 Librarian course was made up of the reflection guidelines that Dr. Brewer wrote. The first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the first up to about here are all, is that right? Maybe up to here, are all the assignments that Dr. Brewer created for the class. And you can go in and use those and look at how she developed the reflection papers and the assignments, because they were really in concert with the information literacy framework. The really interesting thing that happened during the very first day that we were working together as an embedded librarian and professor, faculty member, was that she started talking about a framework that, that the composition faculty members use, and the vocabulary was a lot alike. The terms, the frame, the concepts were a lot like the information literacy. And so we decided, we realized that we were onto something here. And so we started to build the lesson plans that follow here with her guidelines to be able to work together. Then we also determined search strategies for the discovery layer, online catalog, databases, and websites. So we worked together to make sure that that lesson plan came together. We worked on finding primary and secondary resources. She gave me the assignment, and then I worked the lesson plan around that. And evaluating websites, and finally the citing resources using the MLA style formatting, in which I gave them a citation page and asked them what was wrong with it, because I left the mistakes in the citations, and we went over what the different elements of the citation were. And that's this page. And it was really interesting because they knew a lot. And I'm going to hand it over to Carl now.
Okay, so I first used to teach history at Capital Community College, and I started doing this assignment because I was a library director there, but I used to teach a lot of bibliographic instruction, as a lot of my colleagues in the room still do. So I used to, do my own classes because I didn't want to burden, we had a smaller staff, so I, teach the history class, and then I do the information literacy part of it. But when I came here, we have a larger staff, and I don't do the teaching anymore, but I figured it'd be nice to get another voice in the class. So that's one practical thing. If you can have, somebody else come for my class, it was good. And I think Elizabeth mentioned that too, just to hear another voice in the class to reiterate some of the things that I was talking about. So Martha was kind enough to work with me this past 2 semesters. And her role was, to orient students to the library building and website. One thing I found with our students, we have stack levels that you can't see when you first walk in the library. We had a lot of students that did not think that we had any books in the library. Even though I want to weed books, I didn't want to make it that radical. Books in the library. But that's why we ended up adding a tour, because we, I used to be of the opinion, well, a library tour is not going to help us just focus on the assignment, but they wanted a tour to help them to become more comfortable. They got to know Martha. A lot of people ask for her, which some of the other reference librarians sometimes were, they maybe get offended, but you have to watch out for that for practical things. Martha told them, and I did too, ask any librarian, but they did kind of make a good connection, and she showed them Library Congress classification system, because none of them have heard of that. Library catalog, the discovery layer, we have Summon. Databases relevant to the subject, that they're doing, Chicago Notes and Citation Style, and Ref Works. And she put together a subject guide, and we borrowed that from our friends at Capital, where they already mounted one for me. We've been working with it, so it's easy with LibGuides to just borrow, and then she kind of tweaked it a little bit. I learned a lot too about our students, and I learned that, I did this at the community college level, I did it here, and there's not much difference. I still mention it day one in class, and I always said that. When I mentioned this assignment, day one, which was 20% of their grade, a critical book review assignment. I'll explain that in a minute, but I still had people in both the community college and here last week submitting the assignment. So the LibGuide was helpful. In the next slide, we're going to show just some of the hits in the spring semester were more, because Martha came an extra time in the spring semester to the class, and we really pushed it. We really pushed this LibGuide. We also, what I did is I embedded this link to this LibGuide in Blackboard, because the department chair wanted us all to use Blackboard to put our syllabus and all our assignments, PowerPoints, and any handouts. So we embedded it. So and we just were looking at the analytics with our electronic resources librarian, and this is one of the LibGuides that got one of the most hits, because we used it. We had the students use it. Martha was in there to advertise it, and I was. So the assignment that I do is a critical book review assignment. And the ideal is to have them read 2 biographies by 2 different authors and then compare and contrast what they thought of the historical figure. I tried that for a lot of semesters in the community college, but it never worked out. Then I just started doing 1 book. Here as well, we do 1 book because they can barely now get through the 1 book. And a lot of them, I can tell, just skim it at the end of the semester and try to do the assignment. But the ideal would be to do 2 books and then compare and contrast. And again, I designed it to introduce, cultivate critical reading and thinking skills, develop information literacy, and engage students in the academic writing process. So I tell them it's just not going to help you in this particular class, but it'll help you in a lot of different classes that you might take here at Central. Plus, it's good for us because we can have the assessment data. I have all the papers. And what they also do, if you can change the slide, I have them do an information literacy search sheet. And what they have to find with that is information they use in their paper. The first part I have them do is find in one of our library sources more information on the author, like another 5 or 10 page biographical treatment of the subject, rather, the historical subject they're doing. Then I have them find information on who the author is, to see if there's a bias there, and where they're coming from. And the third element I have them find is information on the historical time period that the person that they're doing lived in, so they have some background there. And then I have them also go in here and attach the first page of what they found, so I can see if they really found something on that. And then I asked them in the second box, and you get a better look at that because you can go right to our LibGuide, and we have a copy of this and one completed. I asked them, why they chose the information that really helped in the assignment, and I said, don't just put that the librarian told me, how did this information help you in the assignment? And hopefully they incorporate all this information back into the critical book review. So this is we went to kind of what worked and what didn't. Students made appointments with Martha to search the catalog. The subject guide, we see many hits. 85% of students submitted properly formatted bibliographies in the Chicago style. What didn't work? Many students hadn't yet chosen their subjects even by the last librarian led class, so the librarian couldn't suggest supplemental resources. A lot of them wanted more popular people that there wasn't a good critical biography on that they could use. And also many students chose subjects from there weren't many biographies written, e.g. Dominique Dawes, Layla Ali, etc. So, but Martha, for the second semester, put up a list of biographies that we had in the library, and it really helped. And when I did it at the community college, it was smaller, so I ordered these little stickers from Demco that had biographies, stuck them on the books, and we put them in one section in the library because we had 3 or 4 history professors doing this, so we had the biography section, which was a lot easier to take them right to the biography section. Because a lot of students still, even here, they go to their public library, and some of them were doing in this class John F. Kennedy, but they don't tell the librarian, well, it's for me. They might think it's for their child or their niece or nephew, and they bring a children's book of John F. Kennedy, and they don't know the difference. They say, well, you approve this. And so I told them in the class, please make sure that if you do go to the public library, at Central we know your assignment, but tell them that you're doing a college level assignment so you get a proper book for the assignment.
Well, the other problem was that they would pull from the curriculum lab, which is our children's library section in our our library.
So again, faculty perception, academic staff members have also clearly gained advantage from the collaboration. We find that. You're going to hear more about it with Elizabeth and Martha's collaboration. And now they have a better understanding of library support available, and that's what we're trying to do. Enhance mutual trust, respect for library staff expertise, and not the least a firm foundation of confidence to which to base further plan development. And like we said, I showed the chair of the history department here, our lib guide, and what we were doing. She was very excited about it. And it's good that I have a unique situation where I can teach part-time in that department and try to kind of gear them toward the library. But so it's a good thing. So I can advise if anybody, we talked about it even in an earlier session, how to get faculty buy-in. If you have expertise in another subject and you can teach, try to do it. I even used to teach a lot of FYE courses in my time because I wanted to get on that committee, the first year experience committee, so we could kind of drive them toward the library.
And then the information literacy delivery methods. I was co-teaching the 2 to 3 class sessions with Carl, and of course, we've already mentioned that I developed the subject guide with the suggestions for the biographical subjects. I also included a bibliography for biographical subjects in case they wanted to find somebody else, because I started off with just political people and their political figures and their families. Let's see. And now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Brewer.
So I'm going to talk about the actual assignment sequence that I worked with Martha and Susan as embedded librarians. So I'll get to that in a couple of slides, but I actually wanted to start out by first talking about some of the overlap between composition studies and library science, because we discovered these, as Martha mentioned. She was hearing me talk to some of my students about key terms and threshold concepts in composition studies, and then said, a lot of these are the same. So I thought it might be good, maybe for all of us in the room, to take a look at some of the ways that the two fields are the same in terms of information literacy. And one thing I did, I was hoping actually that an article already existed on this, but it doesn't. So what I did is I looked at some of the most popular textbooks that are used in first-year composition classes. And I'll tell you, I curated this list because, not surprisingly, publishers don't want to release the information of what are the most popular books that they sell. That's their information. But I think that this is a pretty good, accurate list of textbooks that are used nationwide in first-year composition courses. And I'm not going to go through these one by one, but what I think the main takeaway of this slide is that in almost every one of the textbooks that instructors use to teach composition, there's at least one chapter that's devoted to teaching research skills. And in one case, there's 9 chapters in the Norton Field Guide. So really, I think composition instructors feel like it's part of their job and it's part of their discipline to teach information literacy, although we would just call it teaching research. But it's not teaching research or methodology in our own discipline. At least in this first year composition class, it's teaching it as general education, liberal education skills that will transfer to other courses. And I'll talk more about that in a minute.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I went the wrong way.
So a more in-depth way of looking at the similarities between the fields is to look at our framework, which Martha mentioned. So we have what's called the WPA framework. We also have a set of outcomes for first year composition. But I thought you might be interested to know or to see up here that for these 5 different frames within our framework for what students should be learning in our first year composition course, under each of these frames, I was able to read the activities that they would be doing and pull out. So what you see up here are the ones that I pulled out that actually have to do with information literacy. But it's just threaded throughout our own framework. And I didn't fully realize that really until we started working together, because I took it for granted as part of what my discipline does. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of these because I know I've got a timekeeper here, but it's posted to the LibGuide. But I'll give you one example Under the second frame, if you look at each of the 3 activities, these are, I would think, exactly the types of things that you work with students on. So evaluating sources for credibility, bias, quality of evidence and quality of reasoning, conduct primary and secondary research using a variety of print and non-print sources, and generate questions. So generate research questions to guide the research. But these are things that I was teaching in my class anyways before I started working with the librarians. Okay, so another way that I found that the 2 fields are actually very similar is through this concept of transfer. And what I mean by that is knowledge transfer. And I don't know if you guys talk about transfer as much as we do in composition studies. It's become a really cutting edge and a hot topic lately. But one of the things that I came to realize through the Embedded Librarian Partnership is that both of the fields view their work as not only teaching students their own threshold concepts, but also teaching students to be able to transfer both writing skills and research skills to other classes and other situations. And I located where in the ACRL framework it says that. It's actually in the description of it. It's not in one of the frames. But I also thought that maybe the concept of meta-literacy gets at that too, with students understanding a larger concept of how to conduct research, how to manage their sources, than just engage in kind of teacher-pleasing activities and almost having blinders on when they're completing their one assignment and thinking, I'm doing these tasks for this assignment, but I don't see how they fit into other things. And I guess all I'll say about the Composition Studies Scholarship for now is that really more and more we're seeing longitudinal studies about how to get students to transfer the knowledge that they learn about writing. So we know we need to do that, but how do we do it? And actually I think the next slide will give us some details on that. So what I did, and this was the first time for me in designing my composition course, through what I've called a teaching for transfer model. And this I borrowed from these scholars listed here, but what that means basically is that if I want students to be able to transfer what they learn about writing and information literacy, since I was teaching that anyways, then I would teach them to do that by teaching them key terms. So basically giving them a vocabulary to take with them. Because I don't know if this is true of information literacy, but in composition courses, I think students and faculty outside of composition often feel like it's a course without content. Like you go and you write some things and good luck with the things you have to write in the future. So teaching students a vocabulary such as genre and rhetorical situation and audience gives them mental grippers to kind of take with them so they can think, oh, this is why audience matters to this other type of assignment. So I built that into the course this time. And I also used reflection in a way that I haven't before. So I know both of our fields focus a lot on students being metacognitive about the work they're doing. But these reflections actually ask students to use the vocabulary that I introduced to them. And all of the reflections are on the LibGuide, if you'd like to see those, and they have the key terms there that I used. But finally then, the last assignment was what these scholars call a theory of writing, but really what that is a final metacognitive piece where they pull together different terms that they've used after they've completed their other assignments and then say, now I see why these terms were important to me. Now I understand why you say that academic writing is a conversation, for example. Okay, so now to get to the good stuff, or what I think is the most specific, interesting stuff, which is what we did in my English 110 freshman composition class. And I'll tell you, there was a sequence of 3 assignments, not including the reflective assignments that went with each of them. But there was a rhetorical analysis paper, and then this analytical research project that's broken down into different scaffolded sections. And then the last assignment was an argumentative essay. And the Analytical Research project was the middle 8 weeks of the semester and had 4 library visits built in. And those mostly came in after students had done the Analytical Research paper proposal. So they knew basically what they wanted to write about. I had them, it's an analytical research paper because I had them analyzing a source first and then bringing in secondary sources, which this isn't my primary motivation for doing so, but I think deters plagiarism because you're not just picking a topic and can go find papers on it, you've got to analyze a primary source first. But the library visits really came in around the time of the annotated bibliography and source evaluation, and these are the different topics that they covered. And the key terms, I just pulled out those key terms, so these kind of mental grippers, the things that I had students reflect on for each assignment. These are the key terms that went along throughout the different stages of the Analytical Research project. And I know, see, Martha and I discovered that we might be using slightly different terminology, but things like
exigency.
Yeah, exigency. So why is this person writing something? What's the situation which spurred this particular article to be written? What's the larger conversation? And then things like intertextuality, understanding the difference between plagiarizing someone's ideas, but then also understanding that every scholarly article you write is made up of other scholarly articles, and you need to do that too. So how do you do that in a way that's accepted and without stealing someone's ideas? So the last thing I want to say about this slide is that I guess right now I'd say, we feel pretty strongly that these terms not only can transfer composition knowledge, which is what my field's writing about, but I think they can also transfer information literacy knowledge because they're pretty similar. And I think in the future we can continue to work together on what these key terms are for students. But I also think that the dual physical location of the class, because for those 4 classes that we had the embedded librarian support, they were actually in the library. I'm hoping, and I've got some data to show that it's more than a hope, is that students will help see the bigger picture of what they're doing, help to transfer the knowledge beyond just my class when they go to the library and see that the librarians are asking them to do the same things that I'm asking them to do. So it's not just your assignment for freshman composition and then you'll never do this again, that it's actually a larger way of thinking and working with sources in the university. Okay, so we're at the beginning stages of a longer assessment of this because we just did it for 1 semester, but one of the things that I liked about what we did is that we had a control group. So for my 1 class that I described, we had the 4 days in the library, but for my other class, which I also taught in the same assignment sequence, we only had a 1-shot library visit, and it was what I think of as the kind of traditional overview of the library, introduction to the databases. And what we did at the end of the semester is we gave students a survey with their course evaluations and asked them to say, I know this needs some explaining, so it was a Likert scale for each set of skills. So for the first one, use the library to search for a range of sources. The percentage you see is students who said either 4 or 5, yes, I can do this very well. So in the embedded librarian class, that was 85.7% of my students versus 75% who were in the other class. And I'm happy, I think they're fairly high, which is good in both classes. The red is actually where in the class without embedded librarian support it was higher. And I don't quite know why, but actually my guess is right now without more data is that I actually really worried about that class without embedded librarian support because I could see all the things that my other class was getting. So I may have overcompensated and really reinforced that myself. I know, sorry. But it's actually thrilling to me that evaluating the credibility of a source creating a works cited page using MLA, and using online citation tools, which in the past my students have avoided like the plague because RefWorks I think is terrifying to them. That's 100% of my students said, yes, I'm comfortable or very comfortable doing this. And then at the end of that survey, I was hoping to get at this transfer question. So both classes were asked, on the one hand, overall, how useful were the librarian sessions for you for this class, particularly your annotated bibliography and analytical research paper? And then, how useful do you believe the classes will be for your future courses at CCSU? And there are overwhelmingly higher percentages in the embedded librarian course. So these are, I think of this as really the beginning data. It's an indirect measure of student learning because it's student self-reporting. But we do have the student papers, so I handed them back, but I scanned them all. So that's our next step, is actually to develop a rubric so that we can look at how students actually implemented what they were taught about information literacy in their papers. And as Martha mentioned, then for the next semester in the fall, we're expanding the number of classes that we're doing this with. So it's not just about me and my classes, but how this works for other professors too. And then I just wanted to end, because I know I'm in a somewhat unique position here as a faculty member talking to librarians. I thought I'd give my perspective about why I think the Embedded Librarian Partnership works so well for my class. And from my perspective, I think beyond just, I'd say personality or working style, I think that was all great, but that's not that helpful for you because it depends on who you're working with. I also think a big part of what worked well is that the disciplines overlapped nicely. So, and maybe you already do this, but I think if you can try to understand the disciplinary assumptions of the faculty members to see what they might be willing to do, because in some courses, research might not be taught explicitly like it is in English 110 or freshman composition. If it's an upper level course, they might expect the students to already have those skills, and then they might be really grateful to kind of farm that out if they feel like their students aren't at the level that they should be at. But at the same time, if it's a part of the class, like it's a part of my curriculum, then I feel like I'm happy to actually bring in more expertise into what I was already doing. For faculty members who perceive themselves as the authority on research, maybe they would only want the one-shot approach. It might be a maybe less collaborative approach, but maybe that's okay for some disciplines and some faculty members. I also, and this actually third point is really interesting to me, so partnering with disciplines that might share similar values, because I think composition, and you can correct me if I'm wrong when I'm done in just a minute, but I think composition, similar to library science, is often cast in this service role where people think, oh, well, I mean, they say to me, because I'm the director of this first year writing course here at CCSU, sometimes people will say, well, how come our students can't write? And you always think, oh, you know, and so because it's like the composition course is always in the service of every other course. But I actually think the transfer question is a lot more productive and interesting. It's not just that what we're doing is in the service of everyone else's goals, it's that we're teaching fundamentally important skills that are useful to others too, but they're also a part of our discipline. And I think my guess is that there's maybe a corollary there with librarians and the work that they're doing, that you have your own framework work, you have threshold concepts that you want students to be learning, but sometimes you might get cast in just the service role of other disciplines. So, but I think as a compositionist, I can recognize that, and I'm happy to work with others who have the same challenges. And then the last one is just very pragmatic. I'm happy that this work on my classes is also leading to a research project, because, and it's not just for tenure, it's just because it becomes more fulfilling and I feel like we can do more with it. And it's kind of like two birds with one stone. We're already spending a lot of time working on the embedded librarian partnership, so we might as well make it a research project as well. And I think faculty members a lot of times are excited about that.
And I agree with that as well, because one of my biggest challenges as a director is to the provost how information literacy can help with student retention. And both of these projects, eventually, as we keep doing them, is gonna show that it kind of shows our worth in the library. That's really hard to show. So I think this data, but I just got to look at it today, so I'm excited already about it, is the first step to kind of showing that. And when I hired Martha around here at the library, part of her position is assessment librarian. So that's another practical thing, if you can get somebody on staff that just takes care of it, because it's very, very much important now to show how what you're doing every day. It's not enough to just say, well, we did 85 classes last semester. That's around what maybe we do here. It's not, you have to have the assessment data to back that up, that what you're doing is kind of meaningful and it kind of impacts, because we're all fighting for enrollment, because that depends on our budgets. So it's very, very important.
Now I think we have time for questions, right?
I agree. I come out of the English faculty as well. Up until last January, I was an English professor. Now I'm an associate dean, so I oversee the library. What is one of my duties. But in terms of, I love the embedded librarian model. We're using it as well at North Valley, and I think the response that I've often given to faculty who say that the students have taken English 101 or English 110 or whatever, and why can't they write, is, I go back to that person's discipline, and I said, well, they've taken Introduction to Biology, and they can't do biology in my writing class. So it's like,
I like that.
It's like, you're not going to expect someone to learn how to ride a horse through, 3 months of lessons.
You don't get inoculated.
Oh, it's right, exactly. So it's and my view is that if we can spread these competencies, okay, or spread these skills, spread these literacies across the curriculum, and everybody's helping out, okay, and that's why the embedded librarian is such a great model, okay, because we can have embedded everything, okay. If we're doing that, then the students will be transferring those skills.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I honestly think, I want to work on this more, but I think just taking students to the library and just hearing from someone else that they're saying similar things to what I'm saying has to help with transferring, and at least seeing that it's more than just my assignment and my own things that I'm asking students to do. Because that, I feel like, is a real failure of my own pedagogy. If students say, well, I did what Dr. Brewer wanted, it's like, no, it's much bigger than that.
I found that as well, because when Martha came, they had a different voice to hear what I was trying to pound in with all the different information literacy skills, and just to hear it from somebody else, it's just like it's larger. It's not just for this particular one assignment.
Trying to break them of a bad habit of compartmentalizing too much the different skill sets.
I work with an English professor in a similar partnership, and we read a lot. I think we must have been reading a lot of the same things, and the idea that with composition or with library, research skills, they're not going to learn it just in the 1 shot or the 3 shot or however many shots, and then it takes the whole 4 to 6 years that they're in school. So we actually helped or worked on developing some tools so that the faculty members, whatever discipline and whatever level they're working in, will still sort of recognize those skills and help for how they might bring it into their classroom, even if they can't come for a library session. And we also at our school have writing across the curriculum, so that similar idea of like, let's extend those best practices in writing across everything.
Yeah, that's great, and I actually think that I would love it. This would be very difficult, but if you could, even as an institution, or maybe I should be less ambitious and say as a department or some subset of the university, kind of agree on these key terms that you think students should learn. And if you know in freshman composition that students have really talked about audience or the rhetorical situation or whatever it is, then you can say that again. We don't have writing across the curriculum here, but in other courses, refer back to that and build on the knowledge that students get that first year.
I was just going to say, I think a key term that everybody can agree on is the critical thinking. That seems to really transfer across all curriculum, and yet when you, or all departments, and when you get into a particular subject discipline, then you can kind of break it down and say, what does that critical thinking look like in your particular discipline? Because I think that it becomes such a buzzword that you start to wonder, well, what, is it an empty word? Let's talk about what that really means in a particular subject discipline. Because really, it does very much come down to that larger skill, and you can take that into every single class.
I've learned, I was assigned to the Academic Assessment Committee, and I've learned by attending all the sessions, the meetings, that there is so much critical inquiry across the curriculum, and how each department has assessed its critical inquiry elements can be somewhat different, but there are so many similar elements that cross the spectrum that that helped me when I was working in the embedded classes. When I was, as an embedded librarian, I was able to see how each academic subject worked with the different information literacy framework concepts and theories, and yet I understand them from the same point of view, so it works kind of in a circular manner.
Kind of a devil's advocate thing, which is I love the idea of embedded librarians, and I haven't really had a chance to do that myself yet, although I have wonderful partnerships with certain liaison departments. But sometimes I feel as though it's so much work on one particular area, and I worry that it doesn't translate across, the department or the university. And so what I'm really thinking about these days, we're maybe going to lose our footholds with first-year writing programs, because the first-year writing programs are maybe going to be swallowed up and turned into something totally different, because they have lost confidence across the university. So now I'm like, how do we get into this new development of the core? How do we get this tiered programmatic approach? So I was drawn to the comment that you mentioned earlier about getting into the FYE committee or getting onto a committee. So my long-winded comment, what I'm trying to wrap up and say is, do you have any tips for if you were on such a committee with a higher planning goal for translating that message into the goals of the committee?
Yeah, because when I was at the community college, I was on, I sat on the committee and with the faculty, and every time that I went there, my focus was, trying to get information literacy as embedded in the class as much as possible. Even if we didn't go 4 or 5 times, I wanted to make sure that it was really part of that course. And then teaching it as well, when I used to teach it, I think it's just a pitch for librarians to get involved in that, because you can't teach those skills in the FYE class. And then you learn a lot. You learn a lot about how students learn, and then you can use that class as, I use my class as kind of a laboratory to try new things. And they were pretty good about that, because then I come back and report, well, I work, just like if you had an English professor would do it, they'd kind of concentrate more of their class on say, composition and writing assignments. I used to concentrate my particular class more on the information literacy. So I think it was a good thing to be on that committee and to be vocal, just to see where things are going. So we want to try to do that here as we're revamping. The provost here wants to revamp the first year experience eventually, so we want to have a faculty senate academic affairs committee, and I want to get involved and get my library staff involved in that committee as well.
I found it very helpful to understand the overlap between sort of our library sciencey type goals and the composition goals, because our English department is primarily literature people, and it helps explain some of the struggles we've had. It seems like it should be a very natural partnership, but they're over here thinking about critical theory or whatever, and we're like, no, rhetoric, writing. And we have much more success almost with the adjuncts who are composition people, that they bring in to teach writing 101, and I've never understood that, so I just had like this little moment, so thank you. It's like, it gives me some ideas about how to better sort of approach that department, you know, and what kind of language to use in their discipline that might give some better inroads, you know, instead of just being like library words, you know, different words.
Yeah, we can talk later if you want, but I mean, my PhD's in rhetoric and composition, so I'm not a literature person, but I do have an undergraduate English degree, so I understand it, but there is a divide between literature faculty members and rhetoric and composition faculty members. It's not antagonistic, at least here, but yeah, we talk about things very differently, and I actually think that literature professors would be more likely to say, you can teach the students the information literacy skills. I don't know that because they're not teaching it in the way that it's part of the composition curriculum.
Mm-hmm. It's a good idea too, just as a practical thing, to find out how many of you, the best way you can, how many courses where professors teach it themselves, the information literacy elements, because even in the history courses, a lot of them do it. And you were doing it here before you made the partnership with the librarians. Not that you didn't do a great job, but you mentioned also that it was easier to have the librarians do it, then you could focus more on the discipline. And I think I find that a lot here, discovering why people are not using the library as much, and a lot of them now are just doing it on their own.
One interesting thing was that we found out as well was that in teaching information literacy, one of the hardest things that I found that the students have problems with is the topic, the thesis statement creation, and finding that topic. And that was where the embedded librarianship model was very helpful to the librarians, because we then can use the rhetoric professors' concepts of how to write a thesis statement, because that's not necessarily a natural element for the librarians to be teaching. It's a really difficult concept, and I still haven't gotten it down, and I teach a one-credit class on information literacy, and my students still don't understand it. So it's very helpful to the librarians also to get that aspect, that perspective from the composition professors.
I just wanted to kind of piggybacking off what people have been saying, it's just, yeah, I think if professors are able to see the similarities, like what you've been saying, that, you know, how many in the past have just come, oh, just show them the databases or give them a tour, and they maybe don't even realize how, you know, what we can do, how extensive things are, or now with the new framework, how much overlap there is, and maybe if we're able to bring that to their attention, then, you know, more partnerships and instruction can result from that.
Somebody else had a question.
And also, we talked about one of the other sessions too. You know, you want to get your library administration on board as well with all this. I mean, that's what I did for years, information literacy. So it's a love of mine. But you know, if you had somebody as your library director, maybe more in technical services area or a library automation, they might not be thinking about information literacy. But it's important to get their buy-in too, because that way, when they talk at higher level meetings, they'll know how to approach information literacy and talk to faculty about it, try to bring them back into the library.
So I'm just going to try and get this up one more time.
But again, I can pass these out and take a look, because everything from both courses is up on the LibGuide that she made, especially for this presentation. I will make sure that our contact information, well, you can click on any of our names and email us directly from the LibGuide. So if you do need any handouts or anything, if you have any other extra questions, you can easily click on our names and email us. But this is the first homepage. This is the presentation that we just gave. And then these are all the handouts from the composition course that we ran as an embedded class. And I did include the lesson plans and the elements of the citations, PowerPoints, and this is the History 162 information, another PowerPoint presentation that Dr. Antonucci and I gave at the CLA conference, as well as his book review assignments and information literacy sheet. There's also a link directly to his
LibGuide for his History 162 class.
So we don't have all the answers, we're trying, piloting these things, so.
I was really reassured to hear you all talking about the use of books in classes, because I've noticed an alarming decline in the use of books in the community college library where I work. The students don't even know what the books are.
Yeah.
They don't know how to use books once they have them in their hands. They don't know what an index is, this kind of thing. So I've designed a workshop all about books, which helps the students find books, use books, look up things in the index, know that an index exists. But I'm concerned. I guess I'm not sure whether it would be wise for the library to share with the faculty at my institution how little of the collection, the physical collection, is being used by the students, but it really does alarm me. And I just want, you know, when we're talking about information literacy, that we include books, whether they be physical books or e-books, which are still laid out in the same way as a physical book. That is a deep concern to me.
Well, it's important. That's one of our biggest tools that we don't want to disregard that.
I know, and one of the big stumbling blocks for many of our students where I work is that they think you have to read the whole book in order to do research, whereas I'm pointing out, no, you can just glean the facts that you need from a book, unless you're reading a novel or something.
And a lot of them do, even with the ebooks, they do chapter level, they just pick a chapter from the ebook and use that for their research.
Sure. Yeah, that's really concerning to me. I guess I'm just afraid that books are going to die out. It's the technology.
There was an NPR newscast yesterday, I think it was, because they're doing a whole series on paper that says, and they stated through their studies that they found that students of this generation in college now are still looking for print books.
They are.
I have to go back and find out where their studies were conducted, but the NPR series on paper, because the day before they had talked about handwriting and how handwriting is actually helpful to students' memories and anybody's memory. If you handwrite something, you're more likely to remember it than if you type it. But I did want to show you that there is a book link that we put up with the link to the consoles for Dr. Antonucci's class, as well as this, and this is where the suggested biographies list is, as well as suggested subject headings. Because for both classes, I made sure that students understood what a subject heading was and what the Library of Congress was. We've had several students who have told us that they were terrified to go into the stacks. They were afraid to get lost. Because of course in a bigger university library you're going to have a lot more floors. We have 8 floors of stacks and 4 floors of working floors. So it gets very confusing. So there was one student who came up to the reference desk crying because she had gotten lost in the stacks, and another student who said that she never came to the library because she was afraid of getting lost in the stacks. So that tour does really help. And teaching the students what the word stacks means, because it's such a library term and we are all so accustomed to using it and they have no clue what it means. So I always make sure to include that in all of my classes, whether they're the embedded classes or the one-shot classes. Is beyond those 2 doors are where the books are, and if you ever have a question or need help finding something, please come and ask. But we do have lots of books, print books that you can use. And very often people will request the print books over the electronic books at the reference desk. So, and this is the list of biographies.
It seems that most of the faculty where I work are asking students to use databases for their assignments, and very few are asking the students to use books.
I think part of that is the way the assignments are written, that the faculty, there's a distinction between what the faculty know and what the students know. And the faculty assume the students know books, and then they have to particularly direct them to databases. Right? And I don't know, and I don't know that that's still accurate.
Yeah.
And so, and if students are required to use a particular kind of source and paper, they're very unlikely to want to use it,
That's interesting.
I'll just confirm that. I mean, that teaches me something, because I do think, well, it's a lot simpler to go check out a book than it is to learn how to use the databases and to understand the difference between a database and a journal article. So I feel like I want to spend more time making sure students understand that, but that's probably
Right.
not
I think
correct anymore.
it's equally hard for a student to know how to locate a specific or appropriate book in a book database as it is to find an appropriate journal.
Because it's changed now, you're right, that's a good point. I find that too. And now sometimes the book is harder because they're more used to, you know, looking at
Online.
other online things in
You
their
just click
everyday
and
life.
it's there.
Yep.
But not the books
Right.
in their everyday lives are not as much anymore.
Right.
So
And-
they say they remember when they were younger, they went to, you know, to reading hour at the library, but then they lost it to high school and into college.
We're out of time, but again, as I said, you can go onto that LibGuide and email us with any questions.